The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Using Church as a Babysitter. Hey everybody, this video is a result of me kind of driving around rural Vermont for the first time ever. I haven't spent really any serious time in New England, but I was up there in Vermont for the first time. Loved it. It's gorgeous. I was like less than a mile from the Canadian border, and it was beautiful, and we had a great time. I grew up in Missouri, a fairly conservative area. I grew up as primarily a Southern Baptist, although I did occasionally attend things at Pentecostal churches like concerts and things. But my perception of churches was formed there, and it's undeniable that parts of what I say are strongly informed by growing up as a Southern Baptist and the particular type of church I went to. Now, I've studied religions and Christianity in great detail since then. I'm not just an atheist with regard to the Southern Baptist Convention's notion of God. I'm an atheist with respect to all of them. But I was actually taken to church by my parents, who also attended. And so for me, church was something that our family did. This is where we go to learn about Jesus, and I still was taught valuable lessons and morals and ethics at home in addition to church, but my parents went. I do remember some kids in our church who were there without their parents, and it was something that was always presented to me as sad. Yes, it's sad that little Johnny has parents who are lost and going to hell, but at least they're good enough to send him to church so that he can be taught the truth. As we drove around Vermont, we saw some church signs encouraging vacation Bible schools and other things like that, other activities directed at kids, and it prompted a conversation between Arden and myself because we have slightly different backgrounds, not dramatically different backgrounds with respect to church, but different enough. And I remember looking at those signs, and it started a conversation where we talked about the parents who tend to use church as a babysitter. Now, this is a pro-humanist message, and I'm not just trying to beat up on parents. I can talk about how, it's so lazy to just send your kids to church. But the truth is, parenting is hard, and it doesn't come with an instruction manual. And there are far more people who can become parents than perhaps probably should, and certainly far more people who can become parents than are truly equipped for the full responsibility of actually raising a child. Now, I've heard from many people, including some staunch atheists, who send their kids to church and to religious schools because they're better, or because that's where they're going to learn how to be good and do all these other things. And part of it is our world is such that, those parents have to work and they have to do things. They get to spend precious little time with their children. There's a temptation to, as I mentioned, to say, oh, you're just lazy parents. I don't think that's fair, but I understand, despite the fact that I'm not a parent. I've watched the difficulties. I have friends and relatives who are parents, and it's been enlightening to watch how differently different ones handle it. Some are wonderful. They are understanding. They are patient. They would never spank a child. Instead, teaching them lessons in a responsible fashion. Some of them are far too harsh with their kids. Some of them are far too lenient with their kids. But that's all my opinion of how I would do things differently. Parenting can make it harder. Life isn't easy to begin with, but parenting can make it harder. And if you don't have all the answers, if you're not confident in your moral compass, it's easier to go with the time-honored but flawed tradition of having other people do that work. We send them off to school so that they can learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. But also, I would hope that we would be teaching them things like civics and citizenship and ethics classes and things like that. I don't know how much of that is still done and how it resonates with kids. But this trend of parents dumping their kids in church will absolutely continue unless we foster a generation of new parents who no longer feel that need, who no longer feel ill-equipped to handle the difficult questions. How many parents sent their kids to church just because they didn't want to answer the difficult questions? Send them to church, let the church teach them. It can't hurt. They're going to come out okay. It doesn't matter. All that God stuff is, secondary. I don't believe in God. I don't need that God stuff. But, church is just generally good. We have a society where, without even knowing specifically what is taught there, without knowing that it's true, without being aware of all of it, we just assume church good, not church bad. That is the society that we've built. And it's just going to keep propagating generation after generation unless we make some changes. Now, obviously, there are changes in how we can teach the next generation of parents how to be better parents. I think we should be having, just classes in school on parenting concepts. Because, first of all, we have children who are becoming parents. We have children who don't understand the difficulties of their parents and parenting strategies. And there are definitely a good chunk of them that are going to become parents later. I don't know to what extent this has been looked into, or how many schools are actually doing things like this as a sort of parenting thing. And I don't know how well it's going to go over with parents, because if your kids go to your public school and they come back saying, "Mommy, today in class we learned that you're a terrible parent. You're doing it wrong. Here's a better way of parenting," that's not going to sit well with a great many parents. But if there were other parents that were, without judgment, suggesting there were better ways to do this, that allows us an optimistic, hopeful chance of building a generation of parents that no longer feel the need to go to church or send their kids to church. What can you do? Well, number one, be out. Normalizing humanism is as important as normalizing atheism and teaching people about skepticism and critical thinking. It's the three-pronged aspect of how I identify, and as I've pointed out many times, the humanism and the skepticism are far more important to me than the atheism, because if it turns out there is a God, my skepticism will remain, but my atheism will go away. And my humanism will remain, and I will judge that God based on the principles of humanism, unless he can come up with something that's actually better. You have to normalize humanism and make it recognizable by name, not just, oh, there's some good people down the street who go hang out with others. They don't really believe in God. It needs to be by name. Oh, but Matt, not everybody's a humanist. Yeah, but they would be. They could be. And perhaps they should be. Because if one of the values of humanism is modifying humanism so that it consistently uses the best principles to teach us how to interact in this world where we are stuck making decisions and acting on our own, then why wouldn't anybody be a humanist? I mean, there's even religious humanists. I'm an advocate for secular humanism, but advocating humanism is important. Now, this means you'll have to study a bit, but there's lots of folks to help. The second thing you can do is to speak up. When there are unfair practices that favor religions over non-religions, say something. Humanist celebrants and organizations have already done some of the work. Is there an invocation in your town? You can petition to deliver it as a humanist, to let people know, I'm in your community, and while I don't share your religion, I'm not here to destroy your community. I have values, and the values that I hold most dear, while some of them may be in conflict with your religion, they are all things that even religious people would generally identify as a desire to make the world a better place, to value equality and independence, to value cooperation over conflict. Those are principles that are strongly tied to secular humanism and even some religious humanist models, that whether or not there is a God, we seem to be stuck here having to face the problems of life on our own. That's a big deal. And getting that information out with a humanist label is what I would list as step 2. Step 3 is to reach out. Let your theistic friends know that there's another option. But even more important, let your non-theistic friends know that there's another option besides just sending their kids to church. You can actually talk to your kids, and you can talk to them in ways that they can appreciate and understand. You can let them know not everybody believes this stuff. There are people who value it. But is it more important for you to obey the dictates of a particular church or to work alongside others to make the world a better place? And the fourth thing you can do is lend a hand. And this is important because I think arguably a church's biggest draw isn't the theology. It isn't the afterlife. It isn't the salvation. It is the community. There are plenty of people there who don't understand the theology, who may or may not believe the theology, but they love the community. If they move from one town to another, there's a ready-made helping hand. There's people who help you move, people who cook a meal and drop off a potluck thing for you, or cookies. There are people who help you in times of illness. It's a virtually ready-made instant community. And there are people who exploit this. We knew this. We knew in our churches there were people who were sitting there saying, Lord, Lord, and God would say, depart from me, for I never knew you. There were people who were showing up at church for the social aspect, for the networking, the business networking that you can do. Okay, I run this business, you run this business. We're both at the same church. We can cooperate. There's countless reasons that people go to church that have absolutely nothing to do with the theology, and they may not even be believers. We already know there are people in the pulpit who aren't believers. If you're not familiar with this, look up the Clergy Project. Now, I live in a rather normal suburban neighborhood right now. And with one or two exceptions, I don't know my neighbors. Now, maybe those days are far behind us. I remember as a kid playing with the neighbor kids, but I don't know how close my parents were with the neighbors. I think my parents knew the neighbors. They'd visit when they're out mowing the lawn or whatever. But I think mostly they interacted with their friends and family more than the neighbors. But every now and then there'd be a block party, or it was, 4th of July, everybody would be out shooting off fireworks, and maybe this family's just cooking hot dogs on their driveway while somebody else is, setting up a table with potato salad and other stuff. If you weren't out with family and friends, you were hanging with your neighbors. Maybe the world has changed such that the people who live near you aren't the connection that they once were. But when I meet my neighbors, I'm never shy about identifying as a humanist, a skeptic, or an atheist. And in that order of priority, even if I don't always mention them in that order. I was at a reptile convention this past weekend, and I met someone who, in the process of talking about what we do outside of keeping and breeding reptiles, and I told them that I'm a public speaker and debater and on religion and philosophy. And I was leading up to it because you don't just go, oh, I'm a professional atheist, which is already a weird thing to say in the first place. But she was like, oh, are you pro or con? And I was like, oh, I'm the biggest godless heathen you're going to find. And I'm a defender of atheism, a former Christian who had wanted to be a preacher and found my way out. There are people who are afraid to say that. There are people who are afraid to say that they're a humanist. And I get it. It's not safe for everybody to be out, and you're not comfortable. I'm not telling you have to do what I do. I'm saying if you're in a position to do that, I think you should. I don't think that those people were also atheists, because when I mentioned it, there wasn't oh yeah, we're humanists or atheists or skeptics too type of thing. There was just oh, interesting, which is what people tend to say. But when we were done talking with them and we moved on, we still bumped into them a couple other times during the convention. And they were not only friendly, they were absolutely helpful. They let us know that somebody was selling something that we needed, that we'd been waiting for, and that we were able to go over and get the last one because of them. The notion that like me, I get a lot of heat for the heated conversations that take place on the various shows. But by and large, if you get one-on-one with people, that just doesn't happen. The people that I meet at these things when they find I'm an atheist, they don't run away and they don't think I'm awful. What I found was that they weren't any less interested in talking to us about the thing that we were all there for, the reptiles. And in fact, you'll find that some theists are more interested in talking to you because some of them are secretly looking for a way out, and some of them are not so secretly looking for a way to drag you in. And either of those encourages conversation. So don't just be a humanist. Live out and proud as a humanist. Make sure your elected representatives know that you're a humanist and ask them what they're going to do to be the best representative for you and your values, just as someone would ask them the same thing for how they're going to be the best representative for a Christian or a Scientologist or anything else like that. And when you come across people who send their kids to church to teach them the things that as parents they either don't have the capacity to teach or don't have the desire to teach or are worried they're going to do it wrong. Maybe they want to be able to blame the church. He learned that at church. You told me to send him to church because they'd learned stuff at church, and he went and learned that at church. Whatever the reason is, maybe it's a fear of being a bad parent. Maybe it's a desire to avoid responsibility of being a bad parent. When you run across people like that, let them know that there are other options, that they can learn about humanism, interact with humanists, get humanist materials to help them have a better understanding of how to teach their children rather than merely using church as a babysitter. Thanks. Post your comments down below, like and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.